Man, I really appreciate the warm welcome, Rosa and Lynn, and it's really a fun thing to be able to come and talk with a number of people, students, as you're thinking about the future, thinking about transitioning your skills from college and thinking about what that looks like after graduating, and so. Today I'm going to be talking about art career pathways and job search tips. Two things that I think a lot about as, a craftsman and small business owner of my own kind of art business and as a professional recruiter, which is, what I've been doing for the past 8 going on 9 years now. And so, quick agenda, the objective for me in kind of sharing some of these ideas is to share examples of how some artists have shaped their careers to help you identify how you may like to shape yours. And so hopefully some of these ideas will kind of give you some frameworks of how successful, business owners and artists have been able to, carve out a path utilizing their artistic skills to make a living. I'll certainly talk a little bit about myself, share my story, dive into some of those different artist career journeys, and I've got a couple of different ideas about how you might be able to start, thinking about identifying your own journey, and then I'll certainly share some job search tips because that's something that I think a lot about. And as we think about progressing further, whether you're going to start your own business or look for W-2 work. Some of those, tips would probably relate to either kind of, focus. I will definitely have time for questions at the end, but, I'll ask that everybody kind of holds those until we get to the end of the presentation. And so to kind of dive in and talk a little bit about myself, as Rosa shared, Samuel Newman is the name, and I'm from Western Pennsylvania, grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, went to Penn State, PSU, not Portland State, but Penn State. Always kind of a fun thing for me coming out here. I saw PSU everywhere. But both of my parents were entrepreneurs when I grew up and really connected with the autonomy and kind of that sense of hustle that I saw as I was growing up. I was always an engaged student in both high school and college, but I didn't really have that kind of, that thing that I knew that I wanted to pursue. And so, decided that business management felt like the right degree at the time, thinking that maybe I'll own my own business someday. And so while at college, I had to take an art class, and I took a studio ceramics class and just really got hooked, fell in love with, the medium of clay, the community that kind of surrounds pottery. And one of the teachers really must have saw something in me because he, helped me get into the Chautauqua Institute of Art, open some doors. And the Chautauqua Institute of Art is a summer intensive, art kind of program. And so that was certainly a formative time at that age, and really kind of solidified my interest in this creative kind of practice around clay. After graduating and having an opportunity to work abroad for a year, I came back home and I moved to Boston. And my wife, fiance at the time, Portia Newman, she had a great job lined up in Boston, found a studio called Mud Flat, and that's a community studio, provide access to clay, so I was able to continue, working with that medium. After a few years, we decided to move. Really, didn't feel settled in Boston, and I was fortunate to have a partner that had kind of a stable job. She was traveling every week, and so we were able to move out to Portland, and she was able to take a step back from, weekly travel. And so that's what drew us to Portland. But, when I moved here, I didn't have a job, so I walked into a staffing and recruiting agency, and right time, right place, got hired. I'd also had success in Boston working with a staffing agency, and so I figured, let's try it again. And I've really taken ownership over this career path. I enjoy the results-oriented nature of it. Really enjoy learning about people's kind of, pasts and history and work experience and how that might translate to some sort of job in the future. But in Portland, I was able to find a studio, Radius Community Arts Studio, which is a great, studio in the city here that provides facilities and access to people. So I was able to work out of Radius for a few years, continued to really network with that community, but didn't really talk with people outside of that studio a ton within kind of the clay community in Portland. And eventually I got to a point where I really wanted to kind of take the next step and find different types of firing practices. And so I was able to find access to soda-fired kilns and wood kilns and things like that in a few ways, but I moved to the clay compound from Radius, and that was because of the soda firing. I think in many ways, kind of talking through some of those steps is just kind of to illustrate that, sometimes it takes time to start to, figure out, what that creative pathway is going to look like, but eventually really recognizing that the power of a network is real. I'm working in recruiting, building relationships on a day-to-day basis, and also connecting with this thought that, clay is something that I want to do for the rest of my life in some way, shape, or form. And so I decided to join the Oregon Potters Association to really, dedicate more time to expanding my network and my clay community. After a year, I was able to, get elected into the president of the board position with the OPA. And the OPA has been around for 40 years. People have put so much time and energy into the organization. It's really a really fun group. But in 2020 and 2021, I acted as the president of the board and really had an opportunity to develop that clay network. And that certainly opened some doors for me. I started to teach classes at Radius. I started to teach classes at Suay Ceramics. I'll be leading a workshop at East Creek, and I've started to get recognized by galleries, reaching out and requesting to have my work in their shows. One of those is a companion gallery that's down in Gainesville, Florida. Great organization. And then the Northwest Woodfire Conference is a conference that's coming to the area for the first time. It's being organized by East Creek, and the steward of East Creek is actually an alumni of PNCA. His name is Joe Robinson, and just a really motivated and capable individual that's doing a lot for the clay community in Portland and in the surrounding area. So that's a little bit about my kind of background. So today, I work as a senior business development manager for a staffing and recruiting agency called Staffing Technologies. We focus on IT, positions and kind of opportunities. But I do, work with a few other kind of talent pools as well. At the same time, I've started my own kind of clay practice and opened created an LLC for myself a few years ago, and continue to look to develop that clay practice, while working a full-time job. So that's kind of my current kind of hustle, and I do have some goals for the future, which I'll share a little bit later on. So that's kind of my background and story. But I feel like it could be helpful to kind of talk about 4 different artist career journeys, and these are people that I know. Some of them are friends, and so this is not a situation where the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And so, on these slides, I've included their names and Instagram handles, and so I'm sure that they'd be open if you wanted to reach out and ask a few questions. The first one is the e-commerce machine. And so a person that I think really exhibits this artist career journey is a woman named Katie Marks, another Seattle artist on Instagram. And a big part of Katie's practice is that she is selling almost exclusively online, and she has her home studio. She's certainly, I would call her an influencer. She has 200,000 plus followers on social media platforms. She's worked really hard at promoting herself. And so, there's that concept where she is, using social media as a platform to share her process. And when she has, her work completed, she will then create that call to action, update her website, and then people go and they have that kind of, call to action to buy her artwork, the things that she's making. So she's really making small batches of work. She's protecting her creativity by, making what she wants to make. And she's intentionally decided to become good at marketing herself, by partnering with galleries, which play a great role. Sometimes you have, typically, they're going to take 40, 50, 60% of the profit. And so sometimes that's not the most lucrative way to sell your artwork, though, they're a business and they deserve to get compensated for their kind of work as well. But Katie recognized that by becoming good at marketing herself, she'd be able to, have a bigger slice of the profit. On top of that small batch of work kind of cycle that she goes through, she also will design one item annually, and she kind of mass produces that item. As she's kind of developed her practice in business, she does have apprentices that she'll employ, and they'll kind of help make that one item. But that one item she'll allow pre-orders, and so that's kind of a nice additional way to bring in some extra income on top of really feeding her creativity by making these small batches of work. On top of that, she does teach the occasional workshop, and so that's kind of also an aspect of her kind of path, if you will. The next artist career journey is one that is all about kind of versatility in terms of the revenue streams. Deborah Schwarzkopf is a potter who lives in Seattle. She went to Penn State, got an MFA in ceramics, and has worked in a lot of different clay programs and facilities as a resident artist. And I think she was intentional about really, seeing how different studios operate, taking away some of those best practices, developing her vision, and then she settled in Seattle, found the right property, and really started a studio out of her home. And the nice thing about that is you don't have the overhead of another kind of facility or having a lease or something like that. So I think there's a certain kind of strategic element there. But in her home studio, she teaches classes from home. She'll rent membership spaces. She sells work online. She sells work in galleries. She's writing a book. And she has, studio technicians that she employs to help kind of run this business. And so, Deborah also was an early adopter of teaching online workshops, through Zoom during this kind of pandemic period. And so, by getting really good at her craft, she was able to find different ways to kind of leverage that skill to, have, a range of different income streams. And so I think that Deborah really kind of is somebody that has been able to do that really well. And she's spent a lot of time really developing that, that skill and that, and her kind of, her style and things like that. The next artist career journey is one where you're a community studio owner, and it's kind of owning a business. It's a little bit different from Deborah's because it's not as much of a focus on that person as an artist, but it's about creating a space and cultivating that community. And so Corinne Noel is the owner of Radius Community Art Studio, that studio that I talked about a little bit, based right here in Portland. They have a fantastic community, really nice group of people, and so they offer beginner and mixed wheel kind of level classes. They also have some hand building classes. There's more advanced workshops, and so they really try to cater to people at different stages in their journey. They'll rent membership spaces. There are teachers and technicians that they employ. They have a gallery on site that represents the work of their members, and they've also been able to access some grant funding as well. And so, one option, in thinking about, I have this passion for art, but maybe I also have a passion for running a business. A community studio is an idea that might be good to kind of think about. And then the fourth artist career journey that I want to highlight is one, and I'm calling this the shift worker. I don't love the name, but I think it does kind of demonstrate the thought in a nice way. And so, this journey might be one where there's an unrelated income that supports that artist and really helps protect the creative freedom. And so Simon Levin is a really respected potter. He's a wood fire kind of artist, and he is at Wood Fire on Instagram. He has a property in the Midwest, and he has an onagama and studio and facilities, teaches workshops, has long-term and short-term residents. He will sell online, galleries, fairs, but there's a real focus on creative collaboration in his practice, and a part of that are the residents that he brings in. But from listening to Simon talk a few times about his practice, he's intentionally chosen this career path or this job as a firefighter because it allows him to have very structured time blocks where he's either at work fighting fires and doing those things, or he's really dedicating time to his creative kind of pursuits. And so it's all about trying to limit the number of outside factors that are influencing the things that he makes. And so he doesn't want to have those outside factors really kind of demand how he's spending his time in the studio and things like that. So these are really kind of four different career journeys that I think kind of give you an idea of how successful artists have been able to pursue this kind of passion for creativity and art. Not to say that these are the only four options, but sometimes it's really helpful to have an example and to think about that example and see how how your kind of goals and kind of skills might translate. Short, quick little matrix here. One commonality that I think is telling is that a lot of artists, from my lens and kind of understanding, are practicing that art. They're making things and they're selling it, but they're also teaching people. And so that duality, I think, is an element that you'll find is a pretty common thing. The other thing that I'd like to highlight is, as we walk through these four different journeys, you'll see that all of them are kind of running a small business. And I think that when you're looking to make an income based on your art, it's really, it's a small business, you're an entrepreneur, and you're hustling. And it can be a fun thing. I think that sometimes that is a little bit daunting to think about the fact that you got to pay your bills with your art and things like that. But but I think there's different ways to kind of go about it. But really kind of understanding that sometimes being an artist can also means that you're being an entrepreneur. And so those are a few kind of top of mind takeaways there. But the next kind of concept that I want to think about is as you start to think about graduating and what that next journey in your career path might look like. A few baseline things to think about is like, number one, is there a baseline standard of living that you need to meet on a monthly basis? Knowing that I have to make $2,000 a month is important. And so when you think about what type of job and how, and maybe you have a few different types of jobs, something part-time, maybe you're selling your artwork, but think about, this is what I need. And sometimes when you go through that interview and that selection process, having that kind of baseline number for yourself can be a powerful negotiating tool when you're talking to a potential employer. A second one is thinking about, what does my network look like? What businesses, organizations, associations, what groups exist within that field of interest? Because that's an audience that you can start to reach out to and to talk with. And I think, a great resource here is the Talent Hub, because they are, connected with some of those networks already. But identifying that network, I think, is a good baseline, action to take. And then the third is to do some self-reflection. What am I really good at? What do I enjoy doing? And being able to kind of identify that, I think, can start to help you carve out, like, this is something that I'll be able to leverage in the future, something that I want to continue to develop, and also identifying the things that maybe you want to work on. And so I think that those are three good things to start to think about as you start to think about kind of the next steps in your career. I do feel like that some of those ideas are going to translate to these job search tips, and so maybe you resonate with that idea of having kind of a side job while you're kind of developing your art business, or maybe you're excited about finding a W-2 position that allows you to really practice your creative skills in some way. And so these job searches will be applicable for both of those ideas. And so four things that I want to talk about. One is that vision, and I think that having that vision, having that pitch, developing your story is a great first thing to do. I think it's really important to be genuine about that. If you're not genuine, then oftentimes it's not really received in a positive way. We're intuitive people, intuitive beings just in general, and so being genuine, I think, is important. And then as you start to develop that story, feel free to kind of practice. Talk with your friends about what you're striving for. Talk with family members, and then start to talk with those different networks. Those organizations, those nonprofits, businesses. That audience kind of that you might be able to identify. That story is it doesn't have to be fully thought out, but it's like, hey, my goal is to start a business. I'm looking for a part-time job, and here's why this is going to make sense for me. And obviously, it's going to be more developed than that, but maybe that's kind of the idea, and people understand, like, this is what I'm working towards. This really fits into my kind of game plan, and so on and so forth. With that, I think as you start to think about your resume, it's good to have that resume that kind of tells a story. And so, one thing that I like on a resume is having it be chronological. And, a story is chronological. And so as you kind of walk through the steps in your background, it kind of tells that story. Typically, four key points for each experience is appropriate, and that kind of is a part of the story. It's like here's the company that I worked for, here's what I did for them, this is where I did it, and this is how long I did it for. Bullet points beneath with, some of the highlights and achievements and accomplishments. I feel like that education section on your resume can be a chance to create that aura of success. It's like, were you awarded any scholarships? Were you an ambassador for the freshmen coming in? Did you do any work-study jobs? How are you differentiating yourself from kind of your peers? And there's lots of ways to do that, but I think generally, being able to create that aura that you were a successful student is maybe one kind of strategy as you think about that section on your resume. With the skills that you have there, when you look at a job description, oftentimes they're listing out the skills that you need. And so in that skills section on your resume, if you have those skills, it's good to highlight those. And that kind of connects the dots that, hey, I have, some of these core skills that you're looking for. The professional summary helps to provide that framing. That's a chance to take your experience and kind of share that vision. And it's like, hey, here's my experience, here's where I'm coming from, and this is what I'm projecting towards. And so that professional summary is a way to kind of bring that together and help tell that story to the audience, which is hopefully a hiring manager. One way to make a resume a little bit better, in my opinion, is to add numbers and statistics. And so one simple example is, maybe you're tutoring students. Are you tutoring one student or are you tutoring 10 students? And the skills that you're employing as a tutor, are very different if you're doing it one-on-one or with a group. And that's an easy way to convey the scope of your work to the audience, to that hiring manager, in a very objective way. Sometimes in an interview, there's a certain kind of, feeling where you're trying to, talk yourself up, and that's oftentimes a good thing. You want to advocate for yourself, but when you can have a very objective statement that, it just is what it is, that's a positive thing. And so, knowing those numbers and having those things on your resume can make it just a little bit better. In that interview setting, again, be genuine, be yourself. Lots of reasons, but one is, if you kind of tell a story that isn't genuine, you get into that job, you might not be happy, when you're in that job, or you might not have the skills to be successful. And so, that obviously poses a few kind of challenges. But one commonality that I think I see in most interviews is that interviewers like to start with a question. Tell me a little bit about yourself. There's a lot of iterations of that question. Walk me through your resume. What is your career arc? Why are you interested in this job? But it's really an open-ended question that allows you to talk about where you're coming from and why you're interested in this opportunity. So know your resume, know those numbers on your resume, be able to kind of talk about those things. I think that another best practice, always answer the questions being asked. If you don't, then they're going to be like, I don't know if they have good active listening skills. Stay on topic. Make sure that you answer those questions that are being asked. Having a couple of anecdotes prepared is really smart. And 2 questions to ask yourself in thinking about those anecdotes is, how have you made or saved a company money? Or when did you feel a sense of pride? And if you can kind of think about those examples, it will take it from your long-term memory, put it into the short-term memory, and you'll be able to really succinctly describe that for the audience. And a lot of times, those anecdotes you'll be able to use in kind of answering different types of questions. The final kind of topic that I have is the question section of an interview. And the questions that you ask are certainly important in that interview setting. I think a big part of it is you're demonstrating that you are interested. Sometimes you take a step back from the interview and you're like, man, I think that went really well. Maybe the interviewer is doing that too, but they're like, man, I wish they were like a little bit more interested or like curious. They didn't ask any questions. And so it's always good if you have an opportunity to ask questions, throw a few questions out there. One rule of thumb could be the rule of three: ask a question about the business, ask a question about the culture, and ask a question about the job. That question about the business demonstrates that you've done some research. Maybe you read an article, maybe you read through their website, something kind of piqued your interest. That could be a good question about the business. A question about the culture is always a smart thing. Most companies want somebody that is going to fit in with their culture in some way, and there's a lot of ways to talk about that, so we won't get too deep. But I think it's good to provide some framing sometimes with those questions. So it's like, so hiring manager, tell me a little bit about the culture. And that's not a bad question, but maybe if you share the framing and the why you're curious about that, that could lead to a better answer and kind of more insight. And so an example could be, after as I've been job searching and really reflecting on my experience to date, I've recognized that the aspect that really kept me at job X was the culture and the people. And I'd love to learn more about the culture and the people at this company. And so, that why can kind of, make it feel like a more, thought out question, and people will, give you a better answer. They'll feel like, oh, I really want to kind of sell the company here. Questions that kind of allow for you to respond to the question is another strategy. So it's like, hiring manager, within the first 6 months, is there going to be a challenge that you think this person will need to overcome? And they might say, actually, yeah, this is one thing that we're going to have to overcome. And maybe you have experience with that. And then you can come back and respond like, I totally understand that. I have some experience with that. I'd love to be a part of the solution. And so, it's like eyes wide open. They just share something that they're nervous about. Like, we're going to have to deal with this. And then you're like, I get it. No big deal. I'd love to help. So that can be compelling, I think, in the right scenario. One kind of final thing is sometimes it's good to state your interest. Maybe a way to wrap that interview up is to say, man, thank you so much for your time. I've got to say I'm more interested in the job now than I was when I kind of joined this interview. Would welcome an opportunity to continue with the selection process. Do you have any concerns before we part ways today? So you say thank you, you say I'm interested, and you say, do you have any concerns? And there's 3 responses to that. One is, actually, I don't think so. I think I've got a good sense of your background, and they're kind of psychologically reaffirming that you're a good candidate. The second is, actually, I do have a question, and you have a chance to overcome that concern before the interview's done. And then third is where they're like, no, I think we're good, please leave. And it's like, and that's okay, lots of jobs out there. But those are kind of 4 different sections, and I hope some of those interview tips help. But to tie back to that idea, whether you're going to pursue kind of a traditional W-2 job in your field or even something else and continue to practice your art, I think having that vision and thinking about what you want to do and to learn about artists that are successful and seeing kind of how other people have been able to carve out a path for themselves is a good thing to kind of think about. And to think about how you can, model and start to take the things that they do and work that into your own kind of path. And then having the ability to practice and share that with your audience, which can be, your network, businesses, organizations, institutions that are related to this kind of topic of interest that you have. So those are kind of my topics for today. I do have just a few parting comments, and I definitely want to open up to questions as well. But a podcast that I really enjoy that is all about interviewing artists that are hustling and figuring out what their practice looks like is the Maker's Playbook. I'm going to share this PowerPoint presentation with Rosa, and if anybody would like a copy of it, I'm sure Rosa could get you a copy, and I've got a great link on kind of that question. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and I think that article does a really good job at framing that thought. If you are like, man, Sam, where do I find your artwork? You can go to my website, which is www.suayceramics.com. Following me on Instagram is a great way to follow along. I post there on a weekly basis. And then the Oregon Potters Association has an annual sale, and that's at the Convention Center, and that's called Ceramic Showcase, and it's coming up here in May, the 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so I'll be there with a bunch of my ceramic wares. I'm unloading 4 kilns this month, and so it's an exciting thing. And then I have both my work and my creative email address. If you ever have questions, I'd welcome anybody who wanted to reach out and chat about things. And I will say that one of the organizations that I work with is the Portland Art Museum, and they have a really great exhibition up right now, the Mexican Modernism exhibition, and I will be looking for some candidates that might be interested in working in a short-term kind of gallery attendant type of position, to help that exhibition throughout the rest of the month of May and into June just a bit. So if anybody's like, I'd love an opportunity to work part-time with an organization like the museum, while I'm starting to kind of look for work and things like that, feel free to send me an email, because I am going to be jumping into that in the next few days. And so yeah. So that's my talk. Does anybody have any questions? And I know we have a microphone that Rosa has if you do.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to ask the people watching on the live stream too. If you have any questions, please make a comment in the live stream. And we'll take questions from the in-person audience first. Does anyone have questions for Sam? Yes. Mr. Corey. I'm not sure if this is actually working or not.
Okay. So I know a lot of us, at least in my perspective, are animation majors. So like when you gave like the types of different job positions, like at the start, it did really seem to match, because I know a lot of animators work for hire with a studio. What, like, closest to the 4 examples, what would you say would be the most similar to that?
Yeah, and so the question is thinking about how your focus on animation might kind of translate to some of those examples.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair question. I do think that a lot of those examples are really kind of tailored towards somebody that is making a product, and that could be a handmade kind of mug, an object. It could be a painting. It could be any kind of object that you might make. But when you think about animation and things of that nature, I feel like there are some differences, but you're still making something that somebody's going to consume, and oftentimes it's like an experience. And so I think you could kind of think about all four of those in some ways. It's like, do you want to start a business that teaches people and provides facilities for students who want to practice animation? And that might be that studio kind of ownership model. The shift worker, maybe you find, an unrelated job that allows you to really kind of, practice animation, and you have kind of, those tools at home that you're able to do. And then, you start to, share that with, the relevant kind of, places where those things are showcased, I guess. And so I think you can kind of think about those four examples, but you'd have to kind of think about the end product in a different way. And so I think that's a good question, and I feel like you will kind of have to think through how that animation product is kind of similar, would relate to some sort of finished product, like a mug or a painting or something of that nature.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? I have a question, Sam, and it's about mentorship. Like, we hear a lot about how finding a mentor is one of the best ways to really advance your career and grow your network. Do you have any advice or thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of experienced professionals, I think a lot of them do want to give back, and they like the idea of having somebody that they can kind of impart, their knowledge and help mentor people. I think that earlier on in your career, having kind of a vision and sharing, what that is with a mentor, and a lot of times, if that's something that they resonate with or they kind of understand, then sometimes you'll be able to kind of engage with them in a really kind of positive way, and I think that's one element that I kind of resonate with that question. A lot of times it's like, if you don't know what you want to do, or you don't have a way to kind of talk about what you're trying to achieve, then it's hard for a mentor to really connect with you and mentor you along that path. And so being able to articulate something that you're motivated to do and to pursue, I think is a part of that. Because then the mentor, this person that you're engaging with, kind of understands, and they're like, I can help this person achieve that goal. And so being able to articulate that and being able to practice it, I think that's maybe something that really comes to mind.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for that.